The night was too quiet for the neighborhood where Mara Ellis grew up. Quiet meant trouble. Quiet meant someone was planning something. She kept her hood up, her grocery bag close, and her pace quick. She had learned long ago that surviving a dangerous block required two things: eyes sharp and footsteps silent. She was halfway across the cracked intersection when she saw headlights in the distance. 3 pairs, slow, synchronized, too deliberate to be normal. They didn't approach like commuters or taxis. They prowled. Her instincts snapped awake. Someone was about to be boxed in. That's when she saw him. A man in a charcoal coat, hands in his pockets, walking calmly down the sidewalk as if he had never met danger a day in his life. Too calm, too steady, like he belonged everywhere he stepped. He didn't notice the car's tightening formation behind him. Mara did. She dropped her grocery bag. The apples rolled across the pavement. She didn't stop to pick them up. She ran toward the man and murmured urgently without touching him, "Don't look back." Welcome to Korean Mafia lovers. Before we dive into this intense story, comment where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us bring you more captivating romance stories. He froze, not in fear, but in recognition of a command he wasn't expecting. "Excuse me?" he asked, voice smooth, controlled, with the faintest trace of an accent that made each word sound deliberate. 3 cars, as she whispered. "They're closing in. If you turn around now, they'll know you saw them." For the first time, a ripple crossed his perfect calm. His dark eyes sharpened, scanning her face with an intensity that made her skin tingle. "Walk with me," he murmured. It wasn't a request. She matched his stride as the 3 black sedans screeched to a coordinated stop behind them, tires burning against concrete. The air pulsed with silent threat. Mara didn't flinch. She'd learned long ago that showing fear was an invitation for predators. "You noticed before I did," the man said quietly, his voice carrying a note of genuine surprise. "No one ever does." "I pay attention," she replied, keeping her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "It's how people like me stay alive." "People like you?" he asked, and there was something in his tone, not condescension, but curiosity. "Poor," she said simply. "Invisible. Overlooked. The kind of person who learns to read danger because missing the signs means not coming home." He studied her from the corner of his eye, taking in her worn sneakers, the careful way she moved, the alertness that radiated from her small frame. She wasn't what he expected. Most people who approached him wanted something: money, protection, favors. This girl had risked herself to warn a stranger. "You're not in the wrong place," he said finally. "They didn't stop for you. They stopped for me." She blinked, processing the implications. Only 2 kinds of men drew that level of coordinated threat: politicians or criminals, and no politician walked alone down a block like this at midnight. "Who are you?" she asked, though part of her wasn't sure she wanted the answer. He didn't respond immediately. The car doors opened with synchronized precision. Men in dark jackets stepped out, their movements too coordinated to be random street thugs. These were professionals. "Stay close," he said, his hand hovering near the small of her back without quite touching. But Mara shook her head, her mind racing through possibilities. "You're being targeted," she whispered. "And whoever they are, they planned this. That means this street has a trap somewhere." He watched her think, really think, and something shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition of a kindred spirit. "Where's the trap?" he asked, trusting her assessment completely. She pointed discreetly to the sidewalk. "That storm drain is new. It wasn't there last week when I walked this route. They probably staged a spike strip inside it. If we run that direction, they'll force us into the alley." "And the alley?" he tested, impressed by her tactical thinking. "Dead end," she said grimly. "I learned that the hard way when I was 15 and running from different trouble." His lips curved, not in amusement but in admiration. This girl possessed street intelligence that most of his trained operatives lacked. "You're wasted on this neighborhood," he murmured. "No," she corrected, her chin lifting with quiet pride. "This neighborhood taught me everything I know." The men from the cars began to walk toward them, slow, measured, unhurried, predators who believed the kill was guaranteed. The man beside her straightened his coat slightly, and Mara caught a glimpse of something that made her breath catch. A dragon tattoo curling around his neck, partially hidden by his collar. "Miss Ellis," he said, "I'm going to ask you something unusual." She stiffened, her heart hammering. "How do you know my name?" "I make a point of learning the names of people who saved me before I even understand how," he said, his voice carrying an edge of something dangerous and honest. Her pulse thundered in her ears. "Who are you?" she whispered again, though she was beginning to suspect the answer would change everything. He exhaled once, a sound that carried the weight of revelation. "My name is Kang Ju-won." The world tilted. Everyone in the city knew that name, even if they pretended not to. People didn't say it out loud in certain neighborhoods. It was whispered in back rooms and spoken with respect by those who understood power. She swallowed hard. "You're... that Kang Ju-won?" The Korean who controlled the southern district. The man who commanded loyalty from people who didn't fear death. The ghost who moved through the city's underworld like smoke. "Yes," he said simply, "which means those men behind us intend to erase me tonight." She stared at him, her mind reeling. "And you're calm about this?" He smirked slightly, and for a moment she glimpsed the steel beneath his composed exterior. "I adjust to circumstances. It's how I've survived this long." "Adjust faster," she snapped, her survival instincts overriding any awe she might feel. "Because they're spreading out." He looked, following her gaze. She was right. 3 men from the left, 3 from the right, 1 in the center, clearly the leader. Classic containment pattern. "This is coordinated," he murmured, his tactical mind engaging. "Someone sold my location." "Someone close to you," she said without thinking, then immediately wondered if she'd overstepped. He turned sharply, and for the first time she saw real alarm flicker through his expression. "You're certain?" "People don't ambush a ghost unless they know exactly where the ghost will be," she said, her voice gaining confidence. "Someone tipped them off. Someone who knows your patterns." He stared at her like she'd just solved a puzzle that had been eating at him for weeks. His organization was tight, loyal, carefully vetted, but someone had betrayed him tonight. "Miss Ellis," he said softly, his voice carrying a weight that made her shiver, "would you like to live through the next 10 minutes? She raised an eyebrow, some of her natural defiance surfacing despite the danger. "That's a stupid question." Then she grabbed his wrist and pulled him toward a side path so narrow the cars couldn't follow. He let her lead, the untouchable Korean Mafia boss allowing a poor girl from a broken neighborhood to drag him to safety, because she was the only one in a mile radius who truly knew how to survive. They ducked into an abandoned laundromat, its windows boarded up and washing machines gutted for parts. Mara shoved a plastic crate against the door and pressed her ear to the wood, listening. Footsteps approached, paused, then faded as the searchers moved on to other hiding spots. Ju-won watched her with an intensity that made the small space feel charged. In the dim light filtering through cracks in the boards, she could see him clearly for the first time. Sharp cheekbones, perfectly styled hair with a mid-fade that somehow remained immaculate despite their flight, and eyes that seemed to catalogue every detail of their surroundings. "You assess threats faster than most trained operatives," he said, his voice low and thoughtful. "I don't have the luxury of being slow," she answered, checking the back exit to ensure they had an escape route. "Hesitation gets you killed in my world. What do you want in exchange for saving my life?" he asked, and something in his tone suggested this was a transaction he understood. Favors traded, debts acknowledged, power exchanged. She looked up sharply. "Excuse me? Money? Protection? A way out of this neighborhood? People don't help men like me for free. There's always a price." "I didn't help you," she said, her voice carrying a quiet strength that made him lean forward slightly. "I helped a man, walking alone, who didn't deserve to be surrounded by cars full of killers. You could have been anybody." Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the armor he wore like a second skin. "People like me aren't anybody," he said quietly. "Tonight you were," she replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. And that was enough. He studied her in the rain-streaked darkness, trying to understand this woman who spoke to him like he was human rather than a legend. No one in his world challenged him so directly, so fearlessly. "No one speaks to me that way," he said. And it wasn't a threat. It was wonder. "Maybe that's why you keep making enemies," she said, then immediately wondered if she'd pushed too far. But instead of anger, his stare burned with something else. Admiration. and a confusion that suggested she threatened his worldview more than the 7 armed men searching for him outside. Hours passed as they waited. Through the broken windows, they could see flashlights sweeping the streets, hear the low murmur of coordinated search patterns. His men would be looking for him too, but they'd be cautious, professional. The rival faction had pulled back, but they'd be watching, waiting. Through it all, Mara sat opposite him on a broken washing machine, arms folded, gaze unwavering. She didn't fidget or complain or ask when they could leave. She simply waited with the patience of someone who'd learned that survival often meant staying still. "You should have realized someone was following you before I did," she said finally, breaking the comfortable silence. "I rely on professionals for security," he admitted. "My men are trained, experienced." "They're too loud," she said. "Professionals always are. They move like they own the space instead of belonging to it." "And what are you?" he asked, genuinely curious. "Besides impossible to categorize." "A woman who grew up learning to read danger faster than hunger," she said simply. "Both leave scars," he murmured, and she caught something vulnerable in his voice. She didn't look away. Neither did he. The air between them tightened, charged, dangerous, honest in a way that neither had experienced before. "Miss Ellis," he said finally, "you understand things no one in my organization does, not even my most trusted lieutenants. You see threats before they fully form. You read patterns that take my intelligence team days to decode." "And?" she asked, though her pulse quickened at the intensity in his voice. "And I want you beside me," he said, "not working for me, working with me." She blinked, processing the magnitude of what he was suggesting. "You mean, join your world?" "I mean, survive it," he corrected. "Together." She shook her head slowly. "I'm not a weapon you can purchase, Mr. Kang." "I wasn't offering a purchase," he said, stepping closer, not invasive, not claiming, just close enough that she could see the sincerity in his dark eyes. "I was offering a partnership." She hesitated, but not in fear. In power. In the recognition that this moment could change everything. "Why me?" she demanded. "You could have anyone. Trained professionals, educated strategists, people from your world who understand the rules." He moved closer still, and she caught his scent. Expensive cologne mixed with something uniquely him that made her stomach flutter with unexpected warmth. "Because you warned me without knowing who I was," he said softly. "And then you challenged me without fear. And then you saved me without needing anything in return." She swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his attention like a physical thing. "And what do you get if I say yes?" "A woman who sees the world clearly," he said. "Someone who won't lie to me or tell me what they think I want to hear." She held his gaze, searching for deception and finding only raw honesty. "I don't want to be protected like some fragile thing," she said finally. "You won't be. And I don't want to be another asset in your collection. You couldn't be if you tried. And if I decide to walk away tomorrow?" "I'll protect you anyway," he said without hesitation, "because real power means nothing if you use it to cage the people you care about." Her breath caught at the word care. This dangerous, untouchable man was offering her something she'd never had. Genuine partnership, respect, a place where her intelligence would be valued rather than dismissed. "Then I'll stay," she whispered. "For now, on my terms." A slow, reverent smile crossed his face, transforming his features from intimidating to breathtaking. "Miss Ellis," he said, "you just changed the balance of an entire empire." Outside, the street had gone quiet. The 3 cars were long gone, their occupants retreating to plan another approach. The immediate danger had passed, but they both knew this was just the beginning. As dawn approached, they remained in their unlikely sanctuary. A poor girl and a Mafia boss who had chosen each other not out of desperation or calculation, but out of recognition. 2 people who saw the world through the same fractured lens and decided they were stronger together than apart. 3 weeks later, Mara found herself in a world she'd only glimpsed from the outside. Ju-won's penthouse overlooked the city like a kingdom, all glass and steel and carefully controlled luxury. But it was the details that fascinated her, the way his security moved like shadows, the coded conversations that happened in 3 languages, the delicate balance of respect and fear that surrounded him. "You're thinking too loud," he said from behind her as she stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the sunrise paint the city gold. She didn't turn around. "Your lieutenant doesn't trust me." "Hyunwoo doesn't trust anyone," Ju-won said, moving to stand beside her. "It's why he's still alive. He thinks I'm a liability." She could feel the weight of suspicious stares, the careful way conversations stopped when she entered rooms. "He's not wrong. He's terrified," Ju-won corrected, "because in 3 weeks, you've identified 2 security weaknesses he missed, predicted a rival family's move before our intelligence network, and asked questions that exposed a leak in our communications." She finally looked at him, noting the way the morning light caught the sharp line of his jaw. "I'm not trained for this world." "No," he agreed, "you're trained for something better. You're trained to survive." Before she could respond, his phone buzzed with an encrypted message. His expression darkened as he read it. "What is it?" she asked, recognizing the shift in his energy. "The Nakamura family is moving against our shipping operations," he said. "They've been planning this for months, but something's accelerated their timeline." Mara frowned, pieces clicking together in her mind. "The ambush 3 weeks ago, it wasn't random." "No," he said grimly. "It was a test. They wanted to see how I'd react, who I'd trust, how my security would adapt." "And now they know," she said, understanding flooding through her. "They know I'm here. They know you've changed your patterns." He nodded, his jaw tightening. "Which means they'll come for you to get to me." The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it sharpened her focus. "Then we need to move first." "We?" he asked, though something in his eyes suggested he'd hoped she'd say exactly that. "I'm not hiding while you fight a war," she said firmly. "If they want to use me as leverage, they'll have to catch me first." That evening, they attended a charity gala at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, one of those glittering affairs where the city's elite gathered to see and be seen. Mara wore a black dress that Ju-won had chosen, simple but elegant, that made her feel like she belonged in this world of crystal chandeliers and careful smiles. "Stay close," he murmured as they entered the ballroom, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. "Half the people here owe me favors, the other half want me dead." "Which half is which?" she asked, scanning the crowd with the same intensity she'd once used to navigate her neighborhood. "That's the fun part," he said with a slight smile. "Sometimes I'm not sure either." They moved through the crowd like dancers, Ju-won introducing her to politicians and business leaders who spoke in carefully coded language. Mara listened more than she spoke, cataloguing faces and connections, noting who seemed genuinely pleased to see Ju-won and who wore their smiles like masks. That's when she saw him, a man in an expensive suit who watched Ju-won with the focused intensity of a predator. Something about his posture, the way he positioned himself near the exits, triggered every survival instinct she possessed. "The man by the champagne fountain," she said quietly. "Grey suit. Silver watch. He's been tracking your movement for the last 10 minutes. Ju-won's eyes found the man without obviously looking. "Kenji Nakamura," he said, the heir apparent. "He shouldn't be here." "Unless this whole event is a setup," Mara said, her pulse quickening as she noticed other faces in the crowd. Too many men who didn't quite fit, who stood too alertly, who kept their hands free. "We need to leave," Ju-won said, but before they could move, Kenji approached with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Kang, Ju-won," he said in accented English. "What a pleasant surprise." "Nakamura," Ju-won replied evenly. "I wasn't aware your family had interests in children's charities." "We have interests in many things," Kenji said, his gaze sliding to Mara with undisguised calculation. "Including new partnerships." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Mara felt Ju-won tense beside her, his protective instincts flaring. "Partnerships require trust," Ju-won said carefully. "Something in short supply these days." "Indeed," Kenji agreed. "Perhaps we should discuss building that trust, privately." It was a trap, elegant and public, designed to force Ju-won into a vulnerable position. Refuse, and he'd look weak in front of the city's elite. Accept, and he'd be walking into whatever Kenji had planned. "Actually," Mara said, stepping forward with a smile that could have cut glass, "I was hoping to speak with you, Mr. Nakamura. I've heard so much about your family's, business acumen." Both men stared at her, Ju-won with alarm and Kenji with surprise. She was inserting herself into a deadly game, but she'd seen something they'd missed. "I'm particularly interested in your shipping operations," she continued, her voice carrying just enough knowledge to be dangerous. "The new routes through the southern ports must be quite profitable." Kenji's smile faltered slightly. Those routes were supposed to be secret, known only to his inner circle. How could this unknown woman possibly know about them? "I'm afraid I don't discuss business at social events," he said carefully. "Of course not," Mara agreed. "Though I imagine your partners in those ventures might be interested to know how transparent their operations have become." It was a bluff, but it hit its mark. Kenji's composure cracked just enough to reveal the calculation beneath. He was reassessing her, trying to determine what she knew and how dangerous she might be. "Perhaps another time," he said finally, backing away with the careful movements of someone who'd just realized they were outmaneuvered. As he disappeared into the crowd, Ju-won stared at her with a mixture of admiration and concern. "What did you just do?" he asked. "Bought us time," she said, "and maybe saved your life. He was planning something tonight. I could see it in the way his men were positioned. But now he's not sure what I know or who I might have told." "You realize you just made yourself a target," he said, his voice tight with worry. "I was already a target," she replied. "Now I'm a target who fights back." He looked at her, really looked, and she saw something shift in his expression, not just admiration or attraction, but something deeper. Recognition of an equal, a partner who could stand beside him in his dangerous world. "Mara," he said softly, using her first name for the first time. "Yes, I think I'm falling in love with you." The words hung between them like a confession and a promise. Around them the gala continued its glittering dance, but in that moment they were the only two people in the world. "That's dangerous," she whispered. "Everything about this is dangerous," he replied, stepping closer, "but I've never felt more alive." Before she could respond, his phone buzzed with an urgent message. His expression hardened as he read it. "What now?" she asked. "My warehouse on the docks is burning," he said grimly. "Kenji didn't just come here to threaten us. He came here to provide himself an alibi." As sirens wailed in the distance, Mara realized their war with the Nakamura family had officially begun, and she was no longer just a bystander. She was a player in a game where the stakes were life and death. But as she looked at Ju-won's determined face, she felt something she'd never experienced before, the absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The warehouse fire was just the beginning. Over the next week, 3 of Ju-won's legitimate businesses were hit with random inspections that found violations that hadn't existed the day before. 2 of his key lieutenants were arrested on charges that wouldn't stick, but would keep them locked up long enough to disrupt operations. The Nakamura family was dismantling his empire piece by piece, using legal channels to avoid direct confrontation. "They're smart," Mara said, studying the pattern of attacks from Ju-won's home office. "They know you can't retaliate against bureaucrats and judges without looking like exactly what they want you to appear to be." Ju-won stood at the window, his usually perfect composure showing cracks. 30 years my family has built this organization. 30 years of careful relationships, legitimate businesses, respect earned through honor rather than fear. They're trying to destroy it all. Because they can't beat you in a fair fight, Mara said, so they're changing the rules. He turned to her, and she saw something she'd never seen before. Uncertainty. "Maybe you should leave," he said quietly. "Go somewhere safe until this is over." "No," she said firmly. "We're stronger together, remember." "You said that yourself." "That was before I understood what I was asking you to risk," he said, moving to stand before her. "Mara, if they can't get to me directly, they'll come for you. And I can't—" His voice broke slightly. "I can't lose you." She stood, placing her hands on his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart beneath her palms. "You won't lose me. But you might lose yourself if you try to fight this war alone." Before he could respond, Hyunwoo burst through the door without knocking, a breach of protocol that meant emergency. "Boss," he said urgently, "we have a problem. Miss Ellis's apartment building, it's been evacuated. Gas leak, they're saying, but gas leaks don't require armed men in unmarked cars," Mara finished, understanding immediately. "They're sending a message." Ju-won's expression went cold, dangerous. "How many people were displaced?" 43 families, Hyunwoo said. "All her neighbors. They're in temporary housing, scared, asking questions. Mara felt sick. These were people she'd grown up with, families who'd never asked for any part of this war. Mrs. Chen from 3B, who always shared her garden vegetables. The Martinez family with 3 young children. Old Mr. Johnson, who taught her to play chess on the building's front steps. "This is my fault," she said quietly. "No," Ju-won said sharply. "This is theirs, and they just made a mistake." "What kind of mistake?" she asked. "They hurt innocent people to get to us," he said, his voice carrying an edge of steel. "That's not strategy, that's desperation. And desperate people make errors." But even as he spoke, Mara could see the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Every person displaced, every life disrupted, he was adding it to the ledger of debts that needed to be paid. That night, as they prepared for bed in his heavily secured penthouse, the weight of their situation pressed down on them both. Mara stood at the bathroom mirror, removing the elegant jewelry he'd given her, when she noticed Ju-won watching her reflection. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That you're beautiful," he said simply, "and that I'm terrified I'm going to get you killed." She turned to face him, seeing the vulnerability he tried so hard to hide. "Ju-won, look at me." He met her eyes, and she saw the man beneath the legend, someone who carried the weight of too many lives, too many decisions, too much responsibility. "I chose this," she said firmly. "I chose you. Not because I was naive about the dangers, but because I understood them better than anyone. I know what it means to be with you." "Do you?" he asked. "Do you really understand what loving me will cost?" "Yes," she said without hesitation, "and I'm willing to pay it." He crossed to her then, his hands framing her face with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the dangerous man the world knew. "I love you," he said, the words carrying the weight of confession. "I love your strength, your intelligence, the way you see through all the masks people wear. I love that you chose me not despite who I am, but because of it." "I love you too," she whispered, and meant it completely. He kissed her then, soft and reverent, like she was something precious he was afraid to break. But she kissed him back with all the fierce determination that had kept her alive in a world that tried to crush people like her. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she saw something shift in his expression. "What?" she asked. "I just realized something," he said. "They think you're my weakness, but they're wrong." "What am I then?" "My strength," he said. "And tomorrow, we're going to show them the difference." But even as they held each other in the darkness, neither of them saw the figure watching from the building across the street, or the telephoto lens capturing their intimate moment. The Nakamura family was patient, methodical, and they were building a case for why Kang Ju-won had become too dangerous to leave alive. The war was about to escalate, and Mara Ellis, the poor girl who'd warned a stranger not to look back, was about to discover that sometimes love meant walking directly into the fire together. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Hyun-woo arrived with a tablet showing news footage that made Mara's blood run cold. "They're calling you his weakness," Hyun-woo said grimly. "The story broke an hour ago. Crime boss's secret girlfriend, the woman who could bring down an empire." The footage showed their kiss from the night before, taken through the penthouse windows with a telephoto lens. But worse than the invasion of privacy was the narrative being spun, that Ju-won had become reckless, emotional, compromised by his feelings for an outsider. "This isn't just about embarrassing us," Mara said, understanding the deeper game. "This is about isolating you from your allies, making them think you've lost your edge, and giving them justification for what comes next," Ju-won said darkly. "Which is a vote of no confidence," he said. "My own organization convinced I'm no longer fit to lead." Mara felt the walls closing in around them. The Nakamura family hadn't just declared war, they'd turned it into a siege, cutting off every avenue of support until Ju-won stood alone. But as she looked at the man she loved, she realized something the Nakamuras had missed in their careful calculations. They'd underestimated her, and that was going to be their downfall. The emergency meeting was called for midnight at the old shipping warehouse on Pier 47, neutral ground where the heads of the 5 major families could gather without appearing to take sides. Mara watched from the shadows as Ju-won prepared to face what might be the end of everything he'd built. You don't have to do this, she said for the third time. We could disappear. Start over somewhere else. Running would prove their point, he said, adjusting his tie with steady hands. That I've become weak, unreliable. It would destroy everything my family spent decades building. And staying might get you killed, she pointed out. He turned to her, his dark eyes intense. Then I die as who I am, not as who they want me to become. She understood. Honor mattered in his world. Not the twisted version that justified violence, but the real thing that meant keeping your word, protecting those who trusted you, standing by your principles, even when it cost you everything. I'm coming with you, she said. Absolutely not. Ju-won, listen to me. She moved to stand before him, placing her hands on his chest. They're using me as evidence that you've lost your judgment. The only way to counter that is to show them exactly who I am and what I bring to this partnership. It's too dangerous. Everything we've done has been dangerous, she interrupted. But we've survived it together. Trust me. Trust us. He stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Together, he agreed. The warehouse was a cathedral of shadows and steel, lit by harsh industrial lights that created pools of illumination in the darkness. 5 men sat at a circular table, the heads of families that controlled different aspects of the city's underworld. Ju-won took his seat with the confidence of someone who belonged, but Mara could feel the tension radiating from the group. Gentlemen, said Viktor Petrov, the Russian who served as unofficial mediator. We're here because concerns have been raised about leadership stability in our community. Concerns? Ju-won's voice was dangerously quiet. Or accusations? The Nakamura family has presented evidence, said Chen Wei, the Triad representative. Evidence that suggests your judgment has been compromised by personal attachments. Kenji Nakamura leaned forward, his smile sharp as a blade. We've all seen the photographs, Kang. The girl has made you reckless, emotional, weak. Weak? Ju-won's laugh was cold. Is that what you call identifying your spy network, exposing your shipping routes, and predicting your moves before you make them? You give her too much credit, Kenji said dismissively. A street girl playing at strategy. That's when Mara stepped out of the shadows. A street girl who knows that your evidence of Ju-won's weakness is actually proof of your desperation, she said calmly. The 5 men stared at her in shock. Women didn't speak at these meetings. Women weren't even supposed to be present. Miss Ellis, Victor said carefully, this is not your place. Isn't it? She asked, moving to stand beside Ju-won's chair. Since I'm apparently the subject of this discussion. Kenji's eyes narrowed. You have no standing here, girl. I have the standing of someone who's been watching all of you for the past month, she said, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of absolute certainty. Learning your patterns, your weaknesses, your tells. She turned to address the table directly. Mr. Petrov, you've been skimming from the dock workers' pension fund to cover losses from your casino operations. Mr. Chen, your nephew has been selling information to federal investigators. Mr. Torino, your Lieutenant Marco, has been planning a coup for 6 months. The silence was deafening. Each man she'd mentioned had gone pale, their carefully controlled expressions cracking. And Mr. Nakamura, she continued, saving the best for last. You've been working with the FBI for 2 years, feeding them information about everyone at this table except yourself. Kenji shot to his feet. That's a lie. Is it? Mara pulled out a tablet, swiping to a series of photographs. These were taken last Tuesday at the Federal Building downtown. You entering through the back entrance, meeting with Agent Sarah Mitchell for 47 minutes, leaving with a briefcase you didn't have when you arrived. The other family heads turned to stare at Kenji, whose face had gone ashen. You see, gentlemen, Mara continued, while you were worried about whether Ju-won's feelings for me made him weak, you missed the real threat. The man calling for his removal has been betraying all of you. How did you, Kenji started, get this information? Mara smiled. The same way I knew about your shipping routes, your security weaknesses, your planned attacks. I pay attention. I see patterns. And I never, ever underestimate my opponents. She turned back to the table. You want to know what loving me has done to Ju-won. It's made him more careful, more strategic, more aware of threats you couldn't even see, because I see them for him. Victor leaned back in his chair, reassessing. You've been watching us. All of you, she confirmed. Learning your operations, your vulnerabilities. Your secrets. Not to use against you, but to protect what matters to us." "And what matters to you?" Chen asked. "Stability," she said simply. "Prosperity. Peace between the families. The same things you all claim to want, but seem incapable of achieving, because you're too busy watching each other for signs of weakness to notice the real threats." She gestured to Kenji. "Like federal informants in your midst." The warehouse erupted in controlled chaos as the other family heads turned on Kenji, their voices raised in accusation and denial. But Mara wasn't finished. "There's something else you should know," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "Agent Mitchell isn't just running Kenji as an informant. She's planning to arrest all of you next week during the Harbor Festival. Kenji was supposed to provide the final evidence she needed." The room went silent again. "How do you know this?" Victor demanded. "Because I've been tracking her communications," Mara said. "The same way I've been tracking all the threats to our families. While you've been playing politics, I've been playing chess." Ju-won stood slowly, his hand finding the small of her back. "Gentlemen," he said quietly, "I believe the question isn't whether my judgment has been compromised. The question is whether you're smart enough to recognize an asset when you see one." The vote, when it came, was unanimous. Kenji Nakamura was expelled from the council, his operations to be divided among the remaining families. Agent Mitchell's investigation would be quietly derailed through channels that left no fingerprints, and Ju-won's leadership was not only confirmed, but strengthened. As they walked out of the warehouse together, Mara felt the weight of what they'd accomplished. They'd not only survived the challenge to their relationship, they'd turned it into a demonstration of their combined strength. "Miss Ellis," Ju-won said as they reached his car. "Yes? Remind me never to underestimate you." She smiled, rising on her toes to kiss him softly. "I love you too, Mr. Kang. Even now that you know exactly how dangerous my world really is. Especially now," she said, "because I also know exactly how powerful we are together." He pulled her closer, his forehead resting against hers. "What happens now?" "Now?" she said, her eyes sparkling with mischief and love. "Now we build something better, together." As they drove through the city that had tried to break them both, Mara reflected on the journey that had brought them here. A poor girl's warning to a stranger had become something neither of them could have imagined, a partnership that transcended their different worlds, a love that made them stronger rather than weaker, a future that belonged to both of them. The Korean Mafia boss and the girl from the broken neighborhood had found something worth fighting for, each other. Years later, Mara stood in the same intersection where she'd first warned a stranger not to look back. But everything had changed. The cracked pavement had been repaired, new streetlights cast warm pools of light, and the abandoned buildings had been renovated into affordable housing. "The community center opens next week," Ju-won said, joining her on the sidewalk. He wore a simple black suit instead of his usual formal attire, and the dragon tattoo on his neck was partially visible, a reminder of who he was beneath the legitimate businessman facade. "Mrs. Chen is excited about the cooking classes," Mara said, smiling at the memory of her former neighbor's enthusiasm, "and the Martinez kids have already signed up for the after-school program." They'd used Ju-won's resources and Mara's understanding of the community's needs to create something unprecedented, a partnership between the underworld and the neighborhood that benefited everyone. Crime rates had dropped, businesses were thriving, and families felt safe walking the streets at night. "Any regrets?" he asked, his arm sliding around her waist. "About what?" "Warning a dangerous stranger not to look back." She leaned into his warmth, feeling the solid strength of him beside her. "Only one." "Which is?" "I should have warned him that once I saved his life, I was never letting him go." He laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "Is that a threat, Miss Ellis?" "That's a promise, Mr. Kang." As they walked toward their car, a modest sedan that didn't attract attention, Mara thought about the girl she'd been 2 years ago. Alone, struggling, invisible to everyone except those who meant her harm. That girl could never have imagined this life, this love, this sense of belonging somewhere. "What are you thinking about?" Ju-won asked, reading her expression with the ease of someone who'd learned to see past all her defenses. "Just remembering," she said, "the night I told you not to look back." Best advice I ever received, he said, opening her car door with the same careful attention he'd shown her from the beginning. Even though it changed everything. Especially because it changed everything, he said, his dark eyes intense with the love that had transformed them both. You saved my life that night, Mara, in more ways than one. As they drove through the city that had become truly theirs, not through fear or power, but through partnership and hope, Mara realized something profound. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you could do was exactly the right thing. Sometimes warning a stranger not to look back meant you were both finally free to look forward, together. Thank you for staying until the end. Korean Mafia Lovers has many more passionate and thrilling stories waiting for you. Subscribe to the channel and help us create more incredible romance stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat.